We are on Daf Yud Amid Beis. The Gemara, having discussed the machlokas of whether or not the sukkah needs a mezuzah and the lishkas parhedrin needs a mezuzah. The Gemara asks Man Tana, whose opinion is this? And we're going to try and establish some of the halachas of mezuzah when a structure, a doorway, requires a mezuzah and when it does not. Man Tana Laha the Tana Rabbanan. Whose opinion is this brisa that the Chachamim taught? We now on Yud Aleph Amid Aleph 11a at the top. Kol hasha'arim shahayu sham lo haya lehem mezuzah. All the gates on the eastern side of the Beis Hamikdash, or the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, where they would come in from primarily. So all the gates did not require mezuzah. Chutz mishar Nikanor. Besides for Nikanor's gate, which does require a mezuzah. Why? Because that was the way to get in to Lishkas Palhedrin, to the chamber that the Kohen Gadol would stay in for 7 days, which was the matter of which was the question before of whether or not that was that in and of itself needed a mezuzah because someone temporarily lived there. Or no, really, it doesn't need a mezuzah, but in order to show that it was not this like confinement chamber, so therefore the Chachamim said to put on a mezuzah. Now, so the Gemara says, "Leimer Rabbanan." Let's say it's the Rabbanan who say that it intrinsically needed a mezuzah, and therefore, on account of that, the entryway that led to that also had a mezuzah. V'lo Rabbi Yehuda, but not Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda, because if you tell me it's Rabbi Yehuda, who we said earlier, holds that the reason that they put on a mezuzah was not because the chamber, the Lishkas Parhedrin, actually needed a mezuzah, but the reason we put it on is so that it doesn't look like it's a confinement room. It looks like a living quarters. So it's really a Chachamim's enactment, the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan he gufa gzeira. So it's an enactment of the Rabbanan that it needs a mezuzah on the doorway of the room. And then we're going to add to that and say another fence for an enactment upon an enactment, and say the room needs a mezuzah. And since we want it to look real, also the entryway that leads to the room also needs a mezuzah. The Gemara says no, it's actually not gzeira. Normally, as a rule, we say Chachamim do not make gzeira. An enactment, the room needs a mezuzah so it looks right, and then the entryway leading there needs a mezuzah so that you don't mistake that. That would be offense upon offense, and that we don't do that. And when it says Afila Tema Rabbi Yehuda Kula Chada Gzeira, we can even say it's Rabbi Yehuda because it's all one gzeira. Let's put up mezuzahs so that the room looks like a living quarter, meaning the room itself and the entryway towards that room would both need a mezuzah. That's all one concept of the gzeira. It's not two separate gzeiras. Tana Rabbanan. So now we're going to bring a brisa that's going to deal with the exceptions, or the doorways that are obligated in mezuzah and the exceptions to them, and we're going to try and prove the question that we were dealing with yesterday about what spaces would be obligated in a mezuzah. Tana Rabbanan, Bisharecha echad sha'arei batim ve'echad sha'arei chatzeros ve'echad sha'arei medinos ve'echad sha'arei yaros. Whether it's gates, doorways entering a house or a courtyard or a country or a city, and the countries would sometimes have fortifications that were not man-made, but partially made by hillside and mountains, so you can have an entire country sort of surrounded, and they would have a gate, an entryway. So all these entryways would require mezuzah. Yesh behen chayves ha-mitzvah. They have the obligation of the mitzvah l'makam to Hashem. Mishum shene'emar uchsavtam al mezuzos beisecha uvisharecha. As the Torah says, and we say it in the Shema, and you shall write it upon your doorpost of your house and your gate. So the house And the gates and your shower and your gates tells you not only the entryway or the doorways of your house, but also the other doorways of your city, of your courtyards, etc. Amalei Abaye Rav Safra. So Abaye said to Rav Safra, "Hani avuli de mechuzah." These the entryways of mechuzah, and mechuzah was a city, a region, a town or a city in Babylon in Bavel that was primarily Jewish, and it had gates to the city and a archway. My time in the Abdul Rabbanon mezuzah. Why didn't the Rabbanon make a mezuzah there? After all, we just learned that even your city doorways need a mezuzah. Amalei hanu chizuk laker the kubihu David. It's actually not a doorway. These are support beams for the structure above it. And even though, in order to make it nice or to make it stronger, they arched it, and so it looks a little nicer, and it may look like it's servicing the entryway below, but it actually is just a support beam for the space above. And when it's made as a support beam for the space above, then your gates and your and your city walls and your courtyard gates, they do not require a mezuzah. So the Gemara says, okay, great. So it's not a living space. So it wouldn't require mezuzah unless it's made as a doorway. But this actually is a living space. Amalei v'akar kuigufa tabay mezuzah da isbedira l'shemer. But that entryway itself is not, even though that it's not made as a doorway for itself. It's made as a space to support the space above. However, if it's made for living space in there, it should need a mezuzah, the isba dira l'shemer, and this has a living space for the guard, l'shemer beis asurim, and of the prison, and the prison was in that city gate. The Tani we learned, as we learned, beis hakneses sheyish beis dira l'chazin hakneses, a shul, a beis hakneses, which has a living space for the custodian of the Beis HaKnesses, the one who cared for it, the one who took care of its needs and made sure that it was functioning right. So he would live there. Since it has living quarters for that Chazan HaKnesses, Chayeves b'mezuzah, it's obligated in mezuzah. So you see, even a space that generally we say is exempt, if it's made for living space, it requires a mezuzah. Elama abai mishum sakana. Abai says the reason they didn't put up a mezuzah there was a sakana. It was dangerous because people assumed that if you are fiddling with the gate of a city or a gate of a structure that they are connected to, that you were that you were there to harm them, whether through black magic or some other harm that you're trying to do, and you'd be arrested or fined. So it was dangerous. The Tanya was learned mezuzah yachin nivdekes pa'amayim b'shavua. A mezuzah, that's a private person's mezuzah, would have to be checked twice in 7-year period, and the reason was because their mezuzahs were generally not in plastic casing or a proper sealed casing like we have. Their mezuzahs, the parchment, were more exposed to the elements and could become puzzle, and so you needed to check it twice in 7 years. Mishal Rabim Pamayim B'Yovel. However, the communal mezuzahs of mezuzahs that are in communal spaces, they only need to be checked twice in 50 years. V'amar Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda explains with a story. Ma'isa ba'artavin echad. There was a story with artavin, a certain artavin, whether it's a name or a position. He was checking mezuzahs in the upper court, the upper market, shel tzipori of tzipori. So there was a lower market and upper market. And a certain Roman soldier found him. And he took from him 1,000 zuz not to arrest him. The Gemara says, how could that happen? He was doing a mitzvah. Somebody doing a mitzvah doesn't get hurt. Well, that's only if there isn't a common occurrence of this danger. But if the danger is common, so then even a mitzvah won't save him because it's a common occurrence. The Chsiver says, "Vayomer Shmuel." We see Shmuel said the same thing. Hashem said to Shmuel, "Go and anoint the son of Yishai in place of Shaul as a king." Shmuel said, well, "That's a dangerous thing to do right now. Shaul HaMelech is going to think I'm rebelling against him and kill me." So he said, Shmuel, how can I go? Shaul's going to kill me. And now, why is he worried about that? He's doing mitzvah Hashem, and Hashem will protect him. But yes, that's true. But you can't put yourself into an understandable and clear harm's way. So therefore, Hashem told him, "You take a calf with you, and you'll say you're going to bring an offering to Hashem." So now we have a brisa on back on mezuzah. Rav Kana taught in front of Yehuda Beis HaTevet, the house that straw is kept in, and Beis HaBakar, and the structure that the cattle are kept in, Ubeisa Eitzim, and the storeroom for the wood, Ubeisa Eitzus, and storerooms for wine and oil. These are exempt of mezuzah. Not on account of that the storage area is not obligated mezuzah. In fact, the halacha is that a storage place is considered obligated mezuzah. But over here, there's a particular exemption. Why? Because the women beautify themselves there. And what does that mean? What does it mean that they beautify themselves there, or they do comfort for themselves there, sort of like a grooming space? What is that? They bathe there. Now, the halacha is, in fact, that anywhere that people bathe, as we'll see soon, regardless whether men or women, the reason why it mentions that women would bathe there is because men didn't actually bathe at home. They'll go to a river once in a while and just splash themselves, but they didn't actually bathe. When women would bathe in these rooms and these places, they would set up a bath, and that's why it was necessary to say that these rooms, even though they're obligated in mezuzah on account of their storage status, but nevertheless are exempt because women bathe there and therefore are unclothed, and so it's not obligated in mezuzah. So Rav Yehuda says the reason that it's exempt is because women bathe there. But if not for that, it would be obligated in the mezuzah, even though that this is a barn and this is a stall where you have the cattle roaming, and so that's pretty messy place. By the time we learned but we learned that a cattle barn is exempt of mezuzah because it's not nice. So what does it mean? That because women bathe there, that miskashtas, that they beautify themselves there, they adorn themselves there. This is what it means to say. Even though women beautify themselves there, and therefore it should count as living quarters, it's going to be exempt because it's a barn, an animal barn, a cattle barn. Is that really true? That a barn that women adorn themselves in is going to be exempt? Actually, we have a brisa that says that it's obligated in mezuzah. But then we learned we learned that an animal barn is exempt in mezuzah. However, a barn, and even in a barn, if women use it as a place to beautify and adorn themselves, so then it's obligated in mezuzah, since it's living quarters, even though it may be smelly and dirty on account of the barn. But if people are using it for a living quarter type of service, so then it's required in mezuzah. So what are you going to tell me? Well, I guess it's a machlokas of whether or not if women beautify themselves there, it's obligated or still exempt of a mezuzah. I can also tell you Stama Tanai that indeed it is a machlekes Tanaim. Even if there's no women bathing there, or as no women beautifying themselves there, just whether or not a refes bakar, animal barn, is obligated mezuzah or not. The Tani we learned. Beischa miyuchilacha. Your house al mezuzah's beisecha on the mezuzah of your house. The one that's specific to you, your house, pratla beis hateven, which excludes a straw house, a house that stores the straw, beis habakar, where the animals live, or beis ha'etzim, where the wood is stored, or beis itzaris, or any storages like wine and oil. These are going to be exempt of mezuzah. V'yesh mechayvin, and some say no, these are obligated in mezuzah. So so we see now in machlokes that this has nothing to do. The Brisa doesn't mention anything about women beautifying themselves there. That's why it would be obligated. Just simply a storehouse for wine or oil, a storehouse for wood, a storehouse for straw, a place that animals, the animal barn. These are going to be exempt, or some say that it's obligated. So you see that this is a general exemption or a general obligation in mezuzah, and has nothing to do with whether it's being used as well for a home use. The Hemes Amru. So now, in truth, they say that a bathroom and a tanning room, which is where they would put hides into a solution in order to begin to process it, to turn it into leather, which is a horrible smell. And the steam bath house that was common for the Romans, or any mikveh, or the place where women take a comfort bath in. They are exempt of mezuzah. So we now have this brisa that says there's a machlokes. So each one of the opinions are going to explain it according to their view. We had Rav Kahana says that even if it's not used for anything, it's stam. It's just a general barn. Still, it's going to be a machlokes. However, if women beautify themselves there, everybody says that it's obligated in mezuzah. There's no machlokes, because after all, the machlokes is only in if there's no other use besides for the animal barn. But if women or people beautify themselves there, so then it's a home use. And Rav Yehuda is going to explain that no, the machlokes is only in regards to when they beautify themselves there. That's where we have two opinions. But where it's just the animal barn, everybody agrees you're exempt. So the interpretation of this brisa is now each one is going to explain it according to themselves. So Rav Kahana is going to explain according to his version, where he says that the machlokes is in regards to when there's no other use, only for a barn, whether it needs a mezuzah or not. But if there's another home use, everybody agrees it needs a mezuzah. And Rav Yehuda says no. He's going to explain the brisa to me in his way, which is that if there's a home use, everybody is where there's a machlokes, and if it's just an animal barn, everybody agrees that it's exempt. So Rav Kahana is going to explain it his way, that really we're talking about that there's no other use, and that's where the machlokes is. But if you're actually using it as a home use, beautifying, etc., it's going to require mezuzah. Beischa, beisecha, your doorways, the door of your house, the one that's specified for you, meaning that you use prat, and that excludes beis hateven, beis habakar, beis ha'etzim, beis ha'etzaris, storehouses, whether it's for hay or wood or wine and oil, or it's a barn for animals. Those are exempt of mezuzah b'stam if it is used as is. And there are those that say even if it's used as is without any other use, that it's obligated in mezuzah. And then it says, Be'emes Amru, and Allah is that we add to that and say the Beis HaKisa, Beis HaBrusaki, Beis HaMerchatz, Beis HaTfilah. The bathroom and the tanning room, which is the leather room, and a bathhouse and a mikveh, and where women take comfort baths. Where they bathe. That's also going to be exempt on mezuzah because it's not nice. So that's exactly, if women are bathing there, that's exactly like a bathhouse. Whether it's a communal bathhouse or your own bath space at home, it's going to be exempt. Because I may have thought only a communal bathhouse, which has a lot of steam and a lot of sweat. So therefore, it's going to be exempt. About a home bath, which is not that. It's not so sweaty and steamy. Perhaps it would require mezuzah kamashmala. So then we say that indeed there is an exemption even for that. In any case, the brisa is referring to when there's no home use, only the less respectable use, whether it's a bathhouse, steam house, a bathroom, or it's an animal barn. It's going to be exempt of mezuzah, and an animal barn is a machlekes. Rabbi Yehuda, however, Rabbi Yehuda explains it his way, where he says, no, everybody agrees bistama is going to be exempt. The machlekes is only if you use it for something else, a home use as well. So this is what we learn in the brisa. In your home, you need a mezuzah. That's what's set for you, specifically for use. Which excludes the storehouses and the animal barns. They're going to be exempt in mezuzah. When are they going to be exempt? In the first opinion, even if women use it for beautification. In other words, that it is used for a home use, but since it's primarily a barn for animals, it's going to be exempt. And there are those that say, well, if women beautify themselves, it's going to be obligated on account of that it's being used for a home use as well, for a living quarter. But if it's just a barn for animals and there's no home use in there, everybody's going to say it's exempt. As we see, even a bathroom for humans is going to be exempt. That in truth we said even a bathroom for humans. And a tanning house, and a bathhouse, and a mikveh. Even though that people do beautify themselves in these rooms as well, right? Women will adorn themselves there. Nevertheless, it's going to be exempt of mezuzah because of how sweaty and steamy it is. So too a barn, even if women would beautify themselves, could be exempt. Those that would be obligated, but for sure, if it's only used for a barn, it's going to be exempt. So now the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yehuda's part of Rabbi Yehuda's assumption that if it's used just as a barn, there's no machlokas. Everybody agrees that it's going to be exempt, and that's going to be a problem. Because it may be that there's a machlokas even where people use it for personal home use. But even if there's no such use, just the barn itself, there's a machlokas, and we're going to prove that here. But Tani will learn bish arecha. It says in your gates, so in your house doors and your gate doors. Echachare batim, whether it's a gate of a house, or the gateway of the house. Echachare chatzeros, over your courtyard. V'echachare medinas, or of your countries. V'echachare yoris, of your villages, your cities. V'refes, and a barn. V'lulin, and chicken coops, bird coops. Umatven, and a place that's got bales of hay. V'yitzer siyayim v'yitzer shemen, and storehouses of wine and storehouses of oil. Chayavim mezuzah, they're obligated mezuzah, and it mentions a refes, a barn. Yochoshani marbe. And the Brisa continues, it says, and perhaps I would also include av beishar, but perhaps I should also include a house at the shar. So basically, sometimes the gateway would also have a little room, like a walk-through covered space, achsadra, or a foyer, a more of a porch, umer and an upper floor porch in front of a second story entrance. So perhaps these non-living spaces that are made for walking through to get to your space should also be obligated in mezuzah. So that's why it says beisecha. It has to be a home. It has to be a living space. Ma bais michud l'dira. It's made for living space. Yatzu elashem michadim l'dira. These are not made as living space. So these were basically covered porches, covered decks, etc., and an entryway that it was a covered entryway. It had a living. It had some sort of walk-through covered space, protected space, but it was really just a gate, an entryway. Perhaps also we should include a bathroom and bathhouse, the leather tanning house, a base of tefillah, and a mikveh. So again, we said that it has to be a house. It's a honorable use living space. So too, anything that's made for honorable space. They're not made for honor. They're made for needs, but not something you put a mezuzah on. Perhaps also the Temple Mount, Harabayis should need a mezuzah, all the entryways. And also all the bureaus, the chambers in the Beis HaMikdash, Vazaras, and all the courtyards that have doorways going in or arches going in. Tamalim Abayis says a house. Mabayis shuchel, avkol shuchel. So the house has to be a private, mundane living space, as opposed to Yatzu Elu Shem Kodesh. These are holy. In any case, that's the end of the brayso. What we had was, from the beginning, we had an opinion that said at the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph that refes and lulit, an animal barn and chicken coop, are obligated in mezuzah. Now we also saw that there is an exemption for that. It must be that there's a machlokes, even if it's not being used, because that's discussed in the next sections of what type of exemptions are for human use. So we see that indeed this is at least one opinion to Yuvta. So we're that's going to be a contradiction to Rabbi Yehuda, who offered to say that if there's no other use, just a barn for animals, everybody agrees it's not obligated in mezuzah. And here we have at least one opinion that says it is obligated in mezuzah. Tana Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Kamei Rav the Rava. Shmuel Bar Yehuda taught in front of Rava. Shisha Sha'arim Pturim Min HaMezuzah. There are 6 gates that are doorways and yet exempt to mezuzah. Beis HaTeven, one is a storehouse for straw. Beis HaBakar, a barn for animals. 3, Beis HaEitzim, a wood storage house. Or Beis HaEitzaris, for the storehouse for wine and oil. V'shar Hamadi, and a arched gate, like the Medes make. We'll talk about what the exemption there is. V'shar she'ena makura, and a gateway, a door that has the 2 sides but has no lintel at the top. So it's like your typical fence that has a fence, a break, a door there for opening and closing in that breach, in that break, and then fence again. But there's nothing above that you're walking under. So when you walk through that gate, you're walking through something on both sides of you, but nothing above. And so therefore that mezuzah, that post, which is called the mezuzah, is going to be exempt because it doesn't have a doorway, which is a gate on top. So it's not makura, it doesn't have the lintel on top. Or any gate that's not 10 tefachim high. If you have to duck below 10 tefachim, about 30 inches, to get in. So that doesn't count as a gateway, and it's not obligated mezuzah. Okay, so we just went through the halachas, but he said here are 6 exemptions. Amalei pasachta b'shisha. He said here are 6 doorways that are exempt, but you're actually mentioned 7. V'sakas b'shiva, but you if you count, it's actually 7. Amalei shara madi tanayim. So actually, an arched gate is actually machlokas. So what are we talking about in an arch? So of course, if you have a 10-foot a doorway and the top of the doorway is arched, that's not what we're talking about. That for sure is going to be chayv and mezuzah. What we're talking about is that the last of these halachas that he said are exempt is a doorway that is less than 10 tefachim. What happens if it's above 10 tefachim? The halacha is also, in order for a person to go through, it has to be at least 4 tefachim wide, which is not a lot. It's about 12 inches, right? Maybe more, a little more, but it's a pretty narrow space. That's the minimum doorway to be obligated in mezuzah. What happens if you have it arched, where it actually at the point of the arch, at the highest point of the arch, it's 10 tefachim high, and it's at the lowest point of the doorway, it's 4 tefachim wide. However, because it arches, you don't have a complete 4 tefachim wide by 10 tefachim high, because as it arches, it comes in and you lose some of that area that you could come in through. So it actually is narrower and lower in most of the space. So that's a machlokas, and that's what these sharamade, these mead and entryways are. And this is a machlokas. Tana it's a machlokas. And Tana we learned kippah. If it has a dome, meaning it is an arched entryway, Rabbi Meir mechayev. And Rabbi Meir says it's obligated. Mechayev mezuzah. It's obligated in mezuzah. V'chachamim poitim, and the chachamim exempt. Now the Gemara is going the Bryce is going to explain that everybody agrees on the 2 extremes. V'shavin, everybody agrees. Yesh baragla asara. If it's if the lower part, which is 4 tefachim wide at least, is 10 tefachim high. So the fact that somewhere above the shape of this doorway is an arch will not exempt it. That's not what we're talking about, because after all, you have a proper entryway. Shechayev is mezuzah, and therefore it's obligated mezuzah. And Abaye furthermore said, everybody agrees, even if it's 10 tefachim high in the arch, but it has no space at the bottom that's 4 tefachim wide, and no space means it's not 3 tefachim high of 4 tefachim wide. Let's say 10 inches high is going to have about 12, 13 inches wide of opening. Then everybody agrees it doesn't count as a doorway, because we know that 3 tefachim is loved. So the minimum space you're going to need before it starts arching and then it counts as closed is 3 tefachim high by 4 tefachim wide. So everybody agrees that you need it. That's the minimum you're going to need of 4 tefachim wide at the bottom. Inami yesh baragla gimel, or even if it has 3 tefachim high straight before it starts arching, but it never reaches 10 high at the top, meaning it's total in the highest point of the arch. It's only going to be 9.5 tefachim high. It's not going to be enough. Everybody agrees that doesn't count as a mezuzah. So there's no machlokas only in this case. It actually at the highest point of the arch is 10 tefachim high. V'yesh baragla gimel, and it is 4 tefachim wide for the initial 3 tefachim, let's say 10 inches. However, the aim barach v'dalit, but when you get higher than that, it's not 4 tefachim wide anymore. So this archway is a narrow, low archway. It has, for the first, let's say 10 tefachim of the archway, it's straight up, and it's 4 tefachim wide. Let's say 13 inches wide. However, then it starts arching, and at the highest point of the arch, it reaches 10 tefachim straight down to the middle center of that doorway. However, but it gradually is getting narrower and narrower. So now you have less than 4 tefachim wide and less than 10 tefachim high in most of the space. Um, the yesh ba lochuk lashlim al arba. However, if we were to cut some of that stone and arch brick, we could, since we already have a little bit of a leg at the bottom, 3 tefachim, we can just cut straight up to the equal to the height of the top of the archway, and then cut it out and make it square or rectangular, right? But make it a 45-degree angle on each side, and you'd actually be able to turn it into a proper doorway. So this is the concept of choikekin lahashlim. When there's a halachic minimum space, that the area is there, but it's not space, it's filled with brick, can we say, in order to complete the measure, I have the dimensions. It's 4 wide at the bottom. It's 10 high at the center point. And all I need to do is now fill it in by cutting away the edges or the corners. Do we say that or not? Rabbi Meir says, yes, you have the correct size here. You're just missing the corners and the edges. So go ahead and trim that virtually, right? You're not actually going to cut it away, but we can make an imaginary line straight up, an imaginary line across, and now we have a proper doorway. Rabbanan Savri and the Rabbanan saying it is not. We don't do chakika. We don't cut away in order to complete the size. John, it is more like what we would call a dog door, not a typical human entryway. However, it seems like that they were used to crouching and squeezing into doors, as buildings would often, even if they had proper tall doorways or entryways, as they would sink, often that's the way people would get in and out of spaces. So that the minimum usable halachic doorway is indeed a 10 tefachim high, which is only about 30 inches or so, and 4 tefachim wide, which is 12 and change inches wide.
So is that more like an igloo type thing then?
Sort of like that kind of entryway, correct? But they would have that for actual space. Not that igloo is not an actual space for their typical living spaces. Sorry about that. Okay, so the Gemara is going to continue. The Brisa is going to teach us some other exemptions or obligations in mezuzah. Beis HaKnesses, Tanaban. Beis HaKnesses is shul, ubeis ha'isha, and a woman's home, ubeis ha'shutvin, or a home that people live in partnership. Chayeves b'mezuzah, they're obligated in mezuzah. The obligation here is talking about whether it's a private home of an individual a female or a partnership, 2 people that own a home together. Both are going to be obligated in mezuzah. Also, the shul, which is we'll see probably more tomorrow, is it deals with the partnership of all of the interests that have a partnership in that shul. So it's obligated in mezuzah. The Gemara says pshita. Of course, why would a woman's home or a partner's home not be obligated in mezuzah? Ma'od tema beisecha. It says beisecha, your house. And so it's an individual's, and also it says it in the masculine. So it's only a male's house and not a female's house. Beisecha and not beisech. So v'loy beisa, not her house. Beisecha v'loy b'altehem, not their house. It has to be a house that is yours, masculine. Kamash Malan, that tells you that it means partnership and a female's house as well. Well, maybe that is correct. Maybe it's only an individual male's home that's obligated mezuzah. Well, the pasuk says, put the mezuzah on the doorway so that you and your household and your children will have length of days. Males need to live. Women don't need to live. Individuals need to live. People who own houses together do not need to live. Of course. So the Torah telling us that it's in order to live tells us that it's for everyone. So why does it say your house? Well, Kedarava. It's a different teaching. The Rava says beisecha bi'ascha, that the your house actually is to be read the way you come in. Bi'ascha, meaning on your entryway, on your right side. That's the way typically a person who is right-handed will lean with the right side and enter with the right side. Moves right first. In any case, it's the right side of your entryway, and so every room has to be analyzed to see where do you enter that room? Is this an exit or an entrance? And yes. Also, Jules, a garage as well, as we saw, a storage room is obligated in mezuzah as long as it isn't a non, it doesn't have a less respectful use, but the storage areas are obligated in mezuzah as well, and especially if you use that as an entryway to your house, if that's the typical way, they're also obligated in mezuzah, correct. So, where do you put it? So it's not, the reason it says beisecha is not to tell you your house as opposed to someone else's house, partner's house, and as opposed to beisech, her house, but rather it's there to tell you on which side. On the right side coming in. Tani, idach, we have another brisa. Similarly, we have in regards to nega, which we learned in the previous parsha, that when there's a leprosy on a house, there is a blemish of sorts on the house, that there are laws of tumah that apply. That it applies to a shul and applies to a home owned in partnership, and it applies to a woman's house as well. Now, pshita, obviously, why would I think it does not? And the one, he who has the house, it says that to him is this house, will come to the kohen. Loy v'loy la, perhaps to him and not to her. Loy v'loy lahen, to him and not to them. Kamash mala. So it tells us that the halacha applies to them as well. Well, maybe that's indeed correct, because the Torah says the one that to him is this house came. What does it mean that to him is this house? Can't be, because the Torah already says in the land of your inheritance, in the house of your inheritance land. Now, the house of your inheritance land, women also inherit, partners also inherit. So why did the Torah say to him is the house? Because the punishment, the reason why somebody gets this leprosy, this blemish in the house, is on account of this person was stingy and kept everything to themselves. And never wants to lend things, tools and vessels to neighbors. And he says, I'm sorry, I don't have. Can I borrow your screwdriver? I'm sorry, I don't have. So Hashem forces him to let everybody know exactly what he has, because as soon as he has this blemish in the house, the kohen comes, and now they have to take everything out of the house onto the driveway. So Kishmafanes basically takes everything out of his house. Yeah. So there it explicitly tells someone everything he has that he can lend to others. Well, basically, all right. So let's leave it at that. We're going to ask, what about a shul, which we talked about? It can become tummy as well as obligated in a mezuzah, and we'll talk about that tomorrow.